Hi, I'm Kate.
And I'm Mandy, and this is Love Sober,
the podcast for the sober and sober curious.
Hi and welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome an old friend, Veronica Valli. Hello.
Hi, Kate. So nice to be here.
I know, it's so lovely to see you. We nearly met up when you were in London, didn't you? And in the end, I chickened out because I was scared of the bugs on the train.
Well,
and I'm really gutted now. I was like, oh, it would have been so nice.
I don't blame you, but I'm actually going to be home again in the summer, so maybe we can all do something then. It'll be really nice. Yeah, it's just such a. I mean, coming back to England in January in the middle of the Omicron wave. It was a crapshoot anyway. Who knows what I was going to have. I just can't believe I got home without it.
That sounds like one of those heroine journeys, having to come home in Omicron in the winter. It's like, okay,
it was just
a
like
spiritual
that.
challenge. So I'm talking to Veronica again. We actually had Veronica on the podcast on number 74 back in 2020. So I can't believe that's a couple of years ago. But Veronica's written a new book, Soberful, Uncover a Sustainable, Fulfilling Life Free of Alcohol. She has 20 years as a recovery coach and psychotherapist, and she's been sober since 2000. And you're just such a shining leading light in this conversation, which I know, and part of what you do is that you change the conversation about sobriety and how to sustain it. And it's just an honor to have you on again. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm big fans of you and Mandy, because I really wish that you guys had been around when I was in England and kind of Club Sober and all that kind of stuff. It's just so needed. And I just really love seeing the challenges that you are giving to this cultural belief that alcohol is everything. Alcohol's the best way to have fun. So I'm equally as big a fan of you guys.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we've mentioned 2 years since we've kind of spoken, and so rather than kind of diving in, we usually ask us, what brought you to the decision to be alcohol free. So if anyone's listening in, there might be new listeners because of Dry January, right? So that's why we're signposting episode 74, and you tell your story there. So if we could just have a little look at the last couple of years and how things have been for you, what you've been up to, and the latest sort of chapter maybe for you.
How was your pandemic kind of thing?
How's it for you, darling?
How was your pandemic? So I actually remember when we recorded that, because it was during the first lockdown, and I was working in my bedroom because everybody was home, and I had to give my office up to my husband, and I got my book deal got signed right when COVID first hit, and I had to again find quiet places to try and get it written. I remember actually going when we were in New York when the first lockdown happened, and when it was lifted in June, I booked a hotel for 3 or 4 nights because I had to get away from my family to be able to concentrate. And I remember the feeling of giddy freedom. I don't know, it was so weird, wasn't it? But I remember sometimes on Sundays we would just go out for a drive just to get out, and like people used to do in the 50s. We'd just go out for a drive around because you didn't have anywhere to go, nothing was open, so we just sort of drove around, listened to music and audiobooks. So I remember when I drove to the Hamptons, and it was 3 hours, and I felt giddy. And then at the hotel there was only a handful of guests, and we were all kind of 20 feet apart, kind of hello, and it was so weird, but so good to be out. I mean, what's the last 2 years been? I mean, I wrote the book, we've been dealing with the pandemic. It's been, I feel, America was we didn't have a second lockdown, which helped. I know you guys did, and that must have been hard. It depends where you go in the States. Different states did it differently. Florida and Texas, you could do whatever you want pretty much. New York and California locked down really hard, and masks and all that kind of stuff. So, and we live in a very outdoorsy place, so that was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It almost feels like a silly question to ask when I think about it. And I'd forgotten the actually us all in our bedrooms, because I was in my bedroom as well, and I'd given up my office to my husband, but I managed to get it back. And you've clearly managed to get your one back.
Well, we actually, in that time, my husband retired and we moved to the West Coast. So now we live in Nevada, which is, I tell people it's California. It's right on the border of California when we live in the mountains. So my husband, it's amazing. For the first time ever, I don't have any childcare responsibilities. My husband's doing it all. It's incredible. So, and I'm working, and I'm really loving this dynamic right now.
So there's been quite a new lease of life for you recently then.
Yeah, it's really it kind of, happened at the right time, because I've got really busy with the book and a bunch of other things that I'm doing, and my kids are a bit older, but I have always juggled my work around their schedules and had to fit it in, and not to do that is like really amazing. It's liberating.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into the book, because I absolutely loved your book, and we had a brief chat before, didn't we? And I pulled out the phrases that it's about sustainable, fulfilling life free of alcohol, and we had a bit of a chat about that kind of piece about, okay, so this is not necessarily fully equipped book, but it's about, okay, this is the early steps, and you do lead the reader through a journey of what to expect when they embark on this journey. But it goes much deeper into that. And what I'd really love to dive into with you is your kind of method, really, or your model, like that you call your five pillars. And I just wondered if you could, we could take each one and have a dive into them and talk about what they are, and then maybe what you do to look after yourself with reference to that pillar, and why they're so important.
Yeah, it sort of came together because this is stuff that the work that I do. So this is the work I do personally on myself to get where I am. And I always like to point out to people, I did not show up like this. I was a train wreck, and stopping drinking was the first step, but that didn't fix everything. I hit an emotional rock bottom at 3 years. I was suicidal because I hadn't taken care of issues from my past that were still showing up in my present. So and then it's the work that as a psychotherapist I did in clinics and in my private work, that and really the 5 pillars of sobriety, they're just it's just personal development. That what's in the book is appropriate for anybody, and everybody has to do this work. Every human being. It's just that people like us get this kind of urgent call to do it, and it's also for many of us, it's the tools that we didn't have or weren't given as children. We need to be equipped, for example, to have boundaries, to be able to identify our feelings. And I'm sure you didn't. I know I didn't grow up in a family that role modeled that or taught that or anything. So I wanted to put it, the book is basically the how. It's the I'm sober, or I want to get sober, but I do not feel the way that you people have been telling me I was going to feel. I don't, this doesn't, it feels better, but it doesn't, I still feel at a loss. I still feel like my feelings are in charge of me. I still feel full of fear and anxiety. It's the therapeutic work that we need to do, but in a really accessible way. And I don't like the word work. I always use effort. Having a drink problem is hard work. Dealing with an alcohol problem is hard work. We need to put effort into sobriety. And this is like, the book is the effort. You need to do these things.
The effort that you is worth it's worth it, and it's so worth it. But like you said, I think it's really important to almost manage people's expectations around the sober journey, and kind of, forewarned is forewarned is forearmed kind of thing, because that, I definitely resonate with that. And when it happened to me when I was about a year, and then I went back to drinking because of all of the stuff that was
Yeah.
bubbling up that hadn't been dealt with, and all the bad old habits, you know, the stress. I had no idea how to manage my stress. That was the boundary stuff. There was nervous system regulation, there was self-talk, there was you know, I always say you can get sober with the stick, but you can't stay sober with the stick. And that's a kind of that early muscle power, you know, you can, but it runs out, right? So
yeah, no, I like that expression. And because we have in our culture defaulted to alcohol to emotionally regulate ourselves.
yeah.
So it's so accessible, it's so encouraged, it's so cheap, that we have just that's the tool that we use to emotionally regulate ourselves and to deal with, you know, and we get that, oh, you deserve a drink after the week you've had, or have a drink, you'll feel better. And that sounds very harmless, but that's what we did. So we never developed the tools in order to be able to deal with a bad day or all of that kind of stuff. So so the 5 pillars are movement, connection, balance, process, and growth. And they don't really go in order like the 12 steps. They sort of, they're like cogs in a wheel. They all kind of turn together, but we can focus on different ones at different times. And I always kind of start with people focusing on movement, and movement works on 2 different levels. So the first and the easiest one is we have just an abundance of research that shows that moving our bodies, that exercise is simply one of the best things we can do for our mental and emotional health. It's the best antidepressant that we have. I really believe if we can, if people could move their bodies outside in nature on a regular basis, we would solve like 50% of mental health problems. You know, it's just so good for us to just get that. Just walking, you know, I'm not talking about doing a triathlon or anything like that, but just walking outside. So
I just read some research about that. Sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
I actually read some research. It was Steve Kaplan and Rachel Kaplan, who were university professors over stateside. And a while ago, I think in the 70s, they said, and it's funny you should say that, I just read it today, about this kind of boosting mental health in nature. And apparently the minimum is 2 hours a week to actually notice a big difference.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a Peloton, which I love because it's just so easy, but I just think there's such a big difference being where the dirt and the trees and the water is, and so many people I know don't have access to that. But moving our bodies, but there's also the thing about prioritizing that, and I think as women as well, our needs are often, you know, we will put those far down the bottom of the scale, and I think there's something important in that. I'm gonna carve out, you know, 30 minutes most days to go for a walk and listen to a music or a podcast or whatever, because I'm worth that. Yeah. There's something about saying that I'm worth it that's really important. But the other thing about movement is about being, it's about purposeful direction. So it's about, where am I going? Like, what am I moving towards? And what do I want to move away from? Because when I was drinking, I was like a little boat on the ocean without a rudder. I just was sort of this way and that way. I went to university because all my friends went to university, right? I traveled to America because my friends did that. I knew what I was doing this weekend and probably the weekend after, but I didn't really know where I was going or what mattered to me. So when we have an alcohol problem, we lose ourselves a little bit by degrees. We just lose ourselves. And movement is about reclaiming what we want to move towards. So it's a bit about kind of uncovering our values, what really matters to us. Doing a values exercise is really helpful because it will evolve as we get older, but it's about, well, you know, growth is really important to me, or spirituality is really important to me. And then being able to see, actually, there's not anything in my life right now that I'm doing that matches with that, and I want to move back towards those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's asking ourselves what's important to ourselves, and then seeing if there's any of that showing up in our lives,
and then moving towards it. It's just about, like, you know, if if creativity is, you know, one of my values, what is one thing I can do to just move towards that? It's not about I'm going to create a masterpiece by the weekend. It's just like I might buy some coloring pens or something. You know, it's about, because alcohol sucks up so much time and energy. That's why we move away from the things that are important to us, because alcohol is a demanding mistress and takes a lot of time and energy. So it's recognizing that.
Yeah, and how can we uncouple? Because sometimes I think that because when we have an involved relationship with alcohol, our values get somehow misaligned and tied up with it. So it could be like, actually, for me, a really important value for me is fun. So I thought I got that with alcohol. So how can we uncouple almost our values and untangle them from alcohol, and how do we kind of move them onto sobriety?
Yeah, I agree. Me too. I'm very sociable. I'm an extrovert. You know, fun isn't a really important. It's not a frivolous thing. A life devoid of fun would really be horrible. It's reframing that. The book also talks about this in the beginning, is the belief system that we have been culturally given that alcohol is the best way to have fun, and that if we don't have alcohol we won't have fun, and none of those things are true. And that takes a shift in perspective, and it's also a process to. I remember, so I got sober at 27, and I loved, you know, I wanted to go out and party and dance. I just didn't want to use drugs and alcohol. So I was about 11 months sober, maybe a bit less, when I went out with a group of sober girlfriends, maybe 5 or 6 of us. We went to a bar together, and we spoke about it, because we wanted to dress up and go and dance and flirt with boys. And we went, and it was really weird. And it was fine. We danced, but it was very weird. And then we came home. And then after a few more times, it was normal.
Yeah.
And, you know, my late 20s, that's what I was doing. I had a group of friends, some drank, some didn't. We'd go out, we'd go to love live music, I'd go to a lot of live music, which is so much fun for me. Festivals, we used to go to the V Festival in Chelmsford, and go out dancing in different places. And it was so much fun, but it was a process to get there and to see that I could have all of those things sober.
Yeah, it's Bex Weller, lovely Bex Weller, who, I don't know if you know her, she's an author and she does sexy sobriety. Yeah, she's brilliant. Yeah, she said it's always awkward before it's elegant. Yeah, I love that. And we get used to it, right?
It is, all of those things. So it's really this reimagining our lives and these kind of fixed beliefs that I can't have fun because I don't drink, and I can't socialize, and all of that kind of stuff. And none of those things are true, but it is awkward and a bit of an adjustment. And it's so helpful to have a community to support you with that.
Yeah. And then you get those kind of role models, don't you, of just reflected back at you, because you need a different mirror. You need I think you mentioned that in your book, actually, don't you? Is that what's next? So one of your pillars actually is connections. Maybe that's a good one to move on to now.
Yeah, so connection. There's a great book that I used. It's in the notes. It was written by Obama's Surgeon General about loneliness, and there's 3 levels of loneliness. So there's 3 levels of connection, and we all need intimate connection, and that's not necessarily a romantic partner. It can be a platonic soulmate, a best friend, a mentor. We need that level. We need friends, and we need to be part of a community. And we can have 1 or 2 of those fulfilled, but still feel lonely. So that happened to me when I lived in Cambridge just before I got married. I had all of that. I had my husband to be. I had a wonderful circle of friends, big part of the sober community. And then we moved to the United States. And I was pregnant and I didn't have any support. I had my husband, but I was very, very lonely because I just didn't have close friends. I didn't feel part of the community, and I had to work really hard at getting that back. And that's, you know, I've moved several times in America, and each time I'm very conscious that I have to work at it. People are not going to come to my door and be like, oh, you're nice, do you want to come out? You know, you have to show up regularly in places to be able to connect with people.
Effort again, isn't it, you're talking about?
Meaningful connection is life-saving. We need it like we need air and water. loneliness, I think, is one of the defining characteristics of an alcohol problem, and it almost killed me. The loneliness just almost killed me. And when I got sober, I was just talking about this with someone the other day. I mean, the loneliness was a big, big thing. And what terrified me was weekends, because I could work and, you know, that was busy, but I didn't have a family. And like, I'd have all of this time to fill and be on my own. And my weekends were planned well in advance because I was so scared of being lonely. Now, it's not like that now. It hasn't been like that for a long time. Even before I had kids and a family, that went away. But in the beginning, I had to really make an effort. And you know, I go to AA. That really helped a lot in that there's always a meeting, and quite often people go for coffee after a meeting. And that helped enormously in those early days to just fill that time. But I think everyone's experienced that kind of loneliness if you've had an alcohol problem.
Yeah, so true, isn't it? That really resonates with me, because I moved when my drinking escalated. I'd moved to a new town, and suddenly my husband was working in London. I wasn't working in London anymore. I was at home looking after the kids, and I just was like, wowzers. And there was part of that loneliness was when you know that this is not working anymore, but you're getting it mirrored back that it's just completely normal, and you're trying to fit, you're almost like trying to fit in rather than being able to belong anywhere. Probably the most critical point of my recovery was that relationship with myself, that community. And I love what you said you put in your book, belonging to yourself, which is I just felt like I wanted to have a little cry when you said that. And the work of self-compassion, because as soon as I could hold space and love in on myself instead of have that self-aversion, that was almost like that piece in the puzzle of connection as well that I really needed. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is and what causes, I feel, the most pain and distress is the disconnection from who we really are. And it would just kill me that, just like you said, I would show up in a way that I thought other people wanted me to, so I could fit in and not be alone. But I showed up as a fake person. I said things I didn't mean, just so I could, feel like I was part of a group. And my behavior with alcohol caused the deepest connection. And really the connection pillar, the first part, is this returning to ourselves. And it causes the greatest pain, the disconnection. But when we start that journey back to ourselves and reconnect with who we really are, there's nothing like it.
There's like it. No.
Right? And I love it when I talk to someone who knows what that's like.
And it's like, I just wondered, there's something that Tara Brach pulled out. She said something about, it was a lecture on addiction and self-compassion. And she was talking about desire, and the roots of the word desire, as in I want something, mean separated from our star. It means away from our star, like our North Star, our pole star, ourself. And that feeling of that coming back to self, not needing that external, grasping. And I thought that was a beautiful way of sort of a beautiful metaphor almost for that, coming back to self.
And that's, we have to have, to be sober, it's not just about not drinking. There's so much more on offer than the not drinking alcohol. I think sometimes people think like, my life will just be the same. I just won't be drinking or hungover, but nothing else will change. That is not what's on offer with sobriety. There is so much that we can get. But the first step is to put down the booze. But and really one of the richest rewards is that reconnection with who we really are. And it's that I sleep in my head at night, not you. I have to show up in the world in a way that, and act in a way that means I can sleep in my head at night. What I think of me is more important than what anyone else thinks of me. And it was always the other way around. Learning that lesson was a huge one. And that kind of goes on to the next pillar, which is learning to have balance and boundaries. So the third pillar is balance. Whatever the question, balance is always the answer. And balance is about balancing our needs and recognizing that as we grow and our circumstances change, our needs change. And the best example of that really for everybody was the pandemic. Is we have all these different needs, and then bang, we're in lockdown. But we still have needs to be sociable, to exercise, to work, to be with our children, but our circumstances changed and we had to do it differently. I remember we bought bikes and we lived in this little village. It was really cute. And we as a family, we will get up quite early. So we were all up at like 6:30 and we would bike around at 7 a.m. our village and go and visit people. So everyone was in their garden and would be like 10 feet away and we'd just be like, hi, how are you doing? And like we got exercise and we visited and we were able to chat with people and then, go back and the kids would start online school and we would start work. That's an example of we still had those needs, but we had to change how we met them. Yeah. So that's, we were just talking before we got started about, what age we are and going through the menopause. Like that's, our circumstances are going to change and we're going to have, and it's responding to that. When we feel out of balance, when we're not meeting our needs, we will begin to feel uncomfortable in our own skin. And when we feel uncomfortable in our own skin, our brains will look for a way to change that. How can I take this feeling away? And it will look for an anesthetic. Yeah. So that's why it's really important for us to do that.
Yeah, I love that idea. And there is that, I love that kind of that whole topic of balance. And I know that you can do it, you can visually represent it in different ways. I think you talked about having the balance plate with the different elements on it. You could have the wheel of life, or you can, but what are the components that we need then, would you say, to have the balance? What are the ingredients there?
It differs for everybody, but we all have like physical health needs. We need to move our bodies, we need to eat well, we need to get enough sleep, we need to have some meaning in our life, whether that's through our work or somewhere else. We need to have connection with the people, for me, after I had kids, it's like once a month I had this like mums group that would meet up, and I needed that once a month. I needed to not be someone's mother or wife. I needed to be, so we have career needs, we have spiritual needs. So we all, it all looks, we all kind of have the same, but in very different ways, So and it also depends on where you are in your life as well. My husband's just retired, he's in his 60s. What his needs were in his 20s it's very different now. So
and without alcohol, you can hear what those needs are authentically, and then start to go around. Because the other thing is, I had this idea that I should just know how to do things. I don't know why. It was part of my lack of self-compassion. It was like, right, I'm an adult, so therefore I should really know how to do all this stuff. And so this idea that, when life throws us curveballs, or when we go through a transition and we have to recalibrate and get new tools on board, it was like, I sort of felt very static and like I should just know it. And there's a lovely sort of there's a lovely liberty and freedom in allowing ourselves to explore and learn, right? And think, what might that look like now? And the sort of moving through those sort of liminal periods, and then to find a new tool that works, or make those micro adjustments. Just feel like I get that idea where in a cockpit of the aeroplane, like navigating the prevailing winds.
Yeah, and so the thing about balance, we can't have balance without having good boundaries, and those two things go together. So that's one of the fundamental things I see people struggle with all the time. I see this in sober groups all the time. They're sober a few months and they've just, had this tiff with their family or their neighbor or their coworker or their partner, and they feel outraged and they don't understand why. And I just think, you just didn't have good boundaries.
Yeah.
No wonder you feel like that, because you feel like you've been taken advantage of because you didn't say no. And for me, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I actually remember when I remember being in Chip's office when I was about 2 years sober, and I was complaining about my mother, and he said to me, you can have boundaries with family. And I went, Like it was
That's
like
thing.
I was like, no way. Like that blew my mind. And being able, and then it's not just like, okay, I can kind of understand that as a concept, but specifically, how do I have boundaries with people, especially people who just push them all the time, like usually family members. So it's learning, and this is in the book, specifically how to have boundaries in a way that kept the good in and the bad out and kept both of us safe. And understanding, when I began to have boundaries, that I would experience afterburn, which is that kind of sting of when you've said no to someone, you walk away thinking, oh my God, everyone's going to hate me, no one's going to like me, oh my God, they're going to think I'm a terrible person. And that's what I mean about being able to sleep in my head at night. When I said yes to things I didn't want to do because I wanted you to like me, I couldn't sleep in my head at night. I found that once I was out of integrity. So having boundaries, Brené Brown says this, you cannot be happy or successful unless you have really good boundaries. I now have really good boundaries, and it is life changing. I always tell my clients, if you do one thing, and out of my programs, I teach lots of things, and boundaries is usually part of it. If you just focus on boundaries, your life will change immeasurably. They're so powerful. So we can't balance our needs unless we have boundaries in our lives.
Yeah. And it's that, it's where I stop, and the rest of it starts, whatever it is. And I feel like, I personally believe that boundaries is the work of life, or maybe just be for me, but it's like, it's that foundational. And I wonder, so how does this look for people who are feeling like they might need to work on their boundaries? What would be your kind of top tips, or where to start with that?
So this is the rule that has just been life-changing for me. And again, I break it all down in the book. Say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. And what that means, if you stick to that rule, it will always work. Because, so one thing people do is like, if you say, can you help me with this thing on Friday? And I can't. But I give you this really long-winded, I don't know, Kate, because maybe, but I've got to get home and let the dog out. It just sort of depends if my son has soccer or not, and if my husband's there, and I've got to get dinner on. But like, nobody needs my story. You just need, yes, I can be there, or no, I can't. And the thing I explain to people, I love a no. I'm really, really happy if you say no to me, because then I know where I stand and I can move on to plan B. Kate's not going to be able to help me. Okay, what am I going to do instead of that? What I can't stand is a wishy-washy yes. That doesn't help me. A wishy-washy yes, where I kind of have a feeling that, are you going to show up? Are you not going to show up?
There's a lot of energy going into that wishy-washy yes from both sides, right?
Yeah, it's a waste of energy.
Yeah.
So first of all, say what you mean and mean what you say. So, and also, don't say it mean. So here's the thing. If you say what you mean and mean what you say, if I say, Kate, I can't help you with that thing on Friday, and you're pissed off with me, you're like, great. And you're upset. That's not my responsibility. If I have not said it mean, if I've been just, Kate, I'm sorry, I can't help you. If you are upset about that, any feelings that you have about that are none of my business. But I will say that's how people in our lives manipulate us, right? They show their displeasure, and we feel so bad. We want them to be happy and like us again. So we go, oh, you know what? I'm sure I can make it. And you're like, oh, great. So I feel bad, because now I'm like, oh God. But here's the thing. What we're doing there is Kate's feelings matter more than my feelings. So if I say, F off, I've never liked you anyway, you stupid idiot, and you're hurt, well, I have had a part in that, because I was rude and I said it mean. I have had a part in hurting your feelings. So it's sticking to this rule and understanding people may not always be happy about that, and they may huff and puff about it, but other people's feelings are not my responsibility. My feelings are my responsibility. Because now because when I say no, it means I have lots of energy to say yes to things.
Oh, I love
so I can say, yeah, I can help you on Friday because I can and I want to and I've got enough energy.
You're badass with the boundaries. I need you on speed dial when I'm dealing with my son. You got that down. I love it. And that's so true, isn't it? I love that. And don't say it mean. It's almost like keeping our own, if we're keeping our own yard clean there.
Yes.
There's a really good clear line. And I guess what you've said as well, what I see people in our community struggle with is that, and myself too, is that afterburn, like you said, that's sort of being able to sit with or discharge the discomfort of other people's disapproval.
Yeah, the other thing is when you have boundaries, expect to repeat them many times. So I will get clients who say, well, I said no and they didn't listen, and then they just ignore my boundaries, and then they're outraged. I'm like, yeah, because they've known you for 20 years and you've taught them how to treat you.
They'll get used to it. You just have to repeat it.
Yeah, so expect to repeat it many, 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 many times. Calmly, just say the same thing. Just know that people are not going to get it at first.
Be a broken record, basically.
Yeah.
If you are a real broken record with that really calm, like, Sati or something, calm, broken record, they'll get bored of being argumentative with you about it.
Yeah. First did this with my mum, and I remember being on the phone with her and she asked me to do this thing that I didn't or couldn't do. It was 17 times. I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And then she slammed the phone down on me at the end because I had not done. And then what I used to do would be then cave in and say yes. And I didn't do it this time. And now, and it took a while, didn't happen overnight. Now we don't do that. My mum, I'm very clear with my boundaries. My mum knows if I say I can't do that, she knows there's no point pushing it any further.
Love it. Well done. I love that. Thank you. And I've written that down. I'm going to use that.
Put it everywhere. That's what really helped me. That's what changed my life is practicing that rule. And it will be messy at first. You will make mistakes, but you'll get better and better, and the people around you will realize that your yes means yes and your no means no, and that makes life easier in the long run for everybody.
Yeah. And again, there's that thing about, for me, alcohol was the boundary that almost allowed me to feel my edges gradually over time with all the other boundaries.
Yes,
it's a gift because it can let you can feel your edges. And it's uncomfortable at first, but again, those itchy, scratchy bits are aware that, once you can put those boundaries in, like you said, you can have that freedom and you can have that balance to be well.
Yeah, the last two pillars, process and growth, are really process is about understanding how our past shows up in our present. That, sometimes people say to me, I don't want to go digging up the past. It's like, well, it's showing up in your daily life. So it's understanding limiting beliefs. It's understanding the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's healing any childhood wounds that we have, because all of that is baggage that we carry around that we don't even realize that we're carrying. And we can do lots of things to, therapy, 12 steps, this program, workshops, self-help books, meditation, all of this, numerous different tools that help us process feelings that we have. So it's really about, we tend to kind of have this storage container, things have happened to us and we don't process these feelings. We just shove them down inside of us in a storage container. And when we get sober, we have this storage container inside of us full of historical feelings and emotions about things. That's why we feel kind of almost full to the brim when we first get sober, and a bit of an emotional kind of roller coaster. So it's about understanding that we need to begin to honor what happened to us and honor those feelings, validate them by processing them so we can release them. It's about being free of that stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the ways to do that might be therapy. What about this? Well, I'm quite interested in the sort of somatic piece of that kind of, if we're in fight flight, and if we're in fight flight or freeze, that stuff that's happening on that nervous system level. Because I think for me, I remember what my big piece, there was trauma there, and I didn't realize, I didn't have a name for it because it wasn't you know, an earthquake or a physical attack on me. So I had a lot of understanding about trauma to piece together. So what about, speaking to that piece?
Yes. Yeah, and I talk about this in the book, and that's very common. Lots of us have trauma that we are carrying around that's still affecting our daily lives. And I'm a trained psychotherapist. I'm a big fan of that. But I really believe modalities like emotional freedom technique and EMDR are really, really good ways to deal with trauma in the body. So I was so disconnected from my body. I had just so disconnected from what it was saying to me. So it's really about and I, get some sobriety, get a community around you before you embark on doing perhaps some deeper, more personal work on trauma and that kind of stuff. But I love those tools because you can deal with a lot of stuff quite painlessly. It's not like psychotherapy where you spend months talking and talking. You can, I was last year, we have a puppy, and we were both attacked by a pit bull and a husky really badly. They tried to kill him. They bit me. It was really traumatic. And I just knew that I had to take care of that because I couldn't sleep. It was going over and over in my mind. And I went to see my EFT practitioner 3 sessions and it went. Yeah. So there's really, really good ways that we can out there, just like, right, this stuff is showing up. I know it is. Go find a practitioner. You may have to try out 1 or 2 and put the effort in because the rewards of being free are just incredible. And when we talk about freedom, what we're talking about is freedom in our minds. It's so that we're not playing stuff over and over or dwelling on things over and over. It's having freedom in our minds.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that I remember Dawn of She Recovers, we were talking and she said, it's pretty much in her experience, it's always some kind of trauma, because even if it's not it will be some kind of dysregulation, an emotional something rather. So it's again, we've had a lot of understanding, haven't we, about what that word actually means in a similar way to understanding, the whole alcohol use disorder and that becoming more nuanced and sort of accessible. I think that similar around trauma. And I think, I'm interested with the boundaries and with this about, a gender piece. Bias towards for us women drinking as women.
For sure. I mean, for sure. I think I look back and think when I was drinking in the 90s, how lucky I was I was putting myself in more and more dangerous situations. And I think that being a young drunk woman is very different to being a young drunk man and what we can experience. I think that the chances of us having kind of sexual trauma is much higher. So I think that they are different experiences.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really important that you mentioned that I'd like to pull out, I think part of when you stop drinking, I think part of the sort of almost profile of our, people who have problematic relationships with alcohol is that need for immediate gratification or a quick fix, or we get something very quickly to numb something. And so I know for me, certainly, I kind of wanted to fix everything. As soon as I got sober, I was like, right, I literally am going to look like Gwyneth Paltrow in a month, and I'm going to be super hot yoga person and just be an angel. It was like this perfectionist running the show, and very this idea that this process might take a while, and also the idea that maybe I shouldn't be looking at that stuff right away, and almost give myself a period of grace to get used to the nuts and bolts of sober living. I wonder if you can just elucidate on that a little bit more, what you think about that point.
That we don't get perfect overnight.
And also giving ourselves a period of grace. I mean, I think you mentioned in the book that those two are best left.
Yes,
they're at the end of the process, if you like.
It's it's definitely like peeling an onion. The first thing what you need to do is create some solid sobriety, and essential to that is the connection community bit. Have a program in place that we're just we're beginning to do things that just support our mental and emotional health before we get to a point. Lots of people have childhood trauma. Before you go and address that, don't do that on like day 7, or even I think maybe even in the first year. Just be, unless it's there's no avoiding it, which sometimes is the case, is just, I know you're there. We're going to deal with this. I'm just going to make sure I'm on a really sure footing before I do that. I think, and also please just make sure you work with someone who's very qualified and experienced. There's a lot of check people out. I always encourage people to do that when they're going to work with me. I always say, check me out, like really have a good dig, because there's lots of people offering services that they're not qualified and can do way more harm, especially around trauma they're not qualified to deal with.
Yeah, so important. So important. And I agree with you. And that concurs with my experience. I have to say, it's almost like, I'm sober and the rest is good enough, establishing feelings of safety, connection and solid ground. And some really good sort of muscle habit change, sure footing. And I think, when it's the right time. I think for me, I would feel like either excited or like, ready for a new challenge, or I'd feel bored. And that was my almost like a little green flag that I'm ready to add something in, or ready for a bit of new growth.
I had my first child when I was 10 years sober, and I felt on very, very solid ground. I was, but I had postnatal depression. And then when I started parenting, when he was a little bit older, I saw my mother come out, and I didn't want to parent like my mother had parented me. So it was like this whole new layer of work was revealed to me that I didn't know was there until I had kids and had postnatal depression. So, and I'm sure that will happen when I start aging, or, I'm sure that, Chip talks a lot about this on the podcast about getting ready for the big transition. And that's the whole thing about our circumstances change, and new things get opened up, and it's not a bad thing, and it all leads to the next pillar about growth. They're all growth opportunities. The best thing about sobriety is we are all being called to grow. We are all being called to grow beyond where we are right now, and as long as we're human and have breath in our body. But when we're drinking, we don't have the bandwidth to honor that growth. So we kind of stay in a holding pattern where things are all right. They're all right. We've got a nice house and go on holiday or whatever, but we're not growing emotionally in the way that we're capable of. And for me, that's our superpower. Like this is an experience you must not miss. This is the main event. Alcohol's not the main event. This is the main event, is growing into fulfilling your purpose. And it doesn't matter if you don't know what your purpose is. Like, just be in the accepting of, I don't know what my purpose is, but I really can't wait to find out. Like, it doesn't matter where you are. I had no idea when I got sober, this is what I'm best at. I love what I do. This work, I'm really good at it. But I had no idea in the first year of sobriety that I was going to do this, or I'd be good at it, or it's my purpose and I'll do it for the rest of my life. It just unfolded and I just followed it. So the growth piece is the reward. It's the emotional growth beyond where you are now. And with growth will always come fear and resistance, because that's just part of that process. And that's the other thing about a skill, learning the skill to navigate around that. I wasn't given that skill. My eldest son, I noticed with my second son, it's much easier being the second child. They just kind of follow in the oldest one's footsteps. But my eldest son, like recently had a couple of things, like he joined the ski team where we live, and he was really nervous about that because he's not as good as everyone else because he hasn't been skiing very long. So we got him a private lesson and he was really nervous, and now he's fine. Now he loves it. And I always frame it and say, that was a hard thing that you did. Do you remember how scared you felt and you didn't want to do it? But we broke it down and we did it bit by bit. And now you're really enjoying it. Like, I talk about upper limits and growth, and he has a football player American football player he really admires. And I said, when he was a kid, he did the same things. He had to stretch into a new team and it was really scary and blah, blah, blah. So because I didn't have those lessons, and I want him to have those lessons. So we have to learn how to navigate around the fear and resistance and the voice of the ego, but it's just simply a skill we don't have, and we can learn it anytime.
I absolutely love that. I got goosebumps when you were talking about that, and about this being the main event, sobriety being the main event. I love that. And this, so, you know, this stretch piece, how can people just quickly, because I am aware of the time, how can people begin to play with this idea of stretch and navigate the discomfort of that?
There's a great book that was written years ago called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. And it is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway is the way that I get through scary things when I'm being stretched is I first of all acknowledge, like, okay, that's what's happening. This is fear and resistance because this is a new thing. And then I get through it by doing the next right thing. So what is the next right thing? Sometimes that's going and making a cup of tea. Next right thing is I'm just going to make a cup of tea. And I'm going to have an early night. Or it might be I'm just going to send that email, or I'm just going to fill in that form, or whatever it is. It's when we do that, we can let go of the outcomes, because it's what happened. The fear and resistance comes because we're trying to control the outcome, and we're scared we're not going to get it, or it's not going to work out. So that just overwhelms us. So we have to, the way we get through that is just step by step. What is the next right thing? I'm not going to worry about anything beyond making this cup of tea. I'm going to make that cup of tea, and then I'll send that email, and then blah, 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 blah. And that's how we get through it.
And, you know, when you're talking about that, it's sort of making me think, yep, that's sober stuff. It's like the mind tools are life tools, are sober tools, are body tools, are human tools, right? What we're talking about here and what you've put together so brilliantly in your book is these pillars and this kind of roadmap of how to be well as a human. You know, I really feel that. And not miss out on the main event.
Don't miss the main event. Like alcohol and fighting with yourself about whether to have a drink tonight or not is not the main event, and that's not your purpose.
No,
there's so much more on offer for everybody here.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely amazing to talk to you, Veronica. We always finish with just tell us your reason to love sober today.
Today, right now, you know, for me, it's what I'm loving is being up early at weekends. Like, we get up early and we're first on the ski slopes, and it's like, I was just on Sunday, it was really empty, and I was skiing down, and it's crystal blue skies, and I can see Lake Tahoe, and I was like, this is my church. This is my church. Like, I am so in this moment. Like, there's no buzz better than that.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Goosebumps again. So thank you so much again. It's just been a delight to speak to you. And I really appreciate being able to speak to you on a personal level, because we all need those people further down the line, don't we? And it's like that flock of geese kind of thing, flying geese, and we call back to other people, and we call ahead, and we're all, and I find it very comforting, actually. I find it hugely comforting to speak with you. So thank you. Thank you for me.
Thanks, Kate. It's lovely and we will hopefully meet up this summer, hopefully.
Yeah, let's do it. Right. We'll put everything in the show notes, and if you're immediately concerned about your drinking, please do reach out, send up a flare. We'll pop where you can find Veronica below. Reach out to your GP. And just know that you're not alone. Send us an email at hello@lovesober.com, or have a look online and just find the people you vibe with. You're not alone, and we will see you next week for more chat.